Welcome to News from Neptune for September 27th in the 39th week of 2019. I'm Carl Estabrook. The socialist Rosa Luxemburg, murdered by a self-proclaimed socialist government in the aftermath of World War I, said the most revolutionary thing one can do is always to proclaim loudly what is happening. Remarkably enough, we seem to be verging on a discussion in this country of what the term socialist means. It's not easy, owing to generations of U.S. propaganda. Noam Chomsky, who inspires our program, says, terms like capitalism and socialism have been so evacuated of meaning that I don't like to use them. There's nothing remotely like capitalism, in Karl Marx's sense, in existence. To the extent there ever was, it disappeared by the 1920s. Every industrial society today is one form or another of state capitalism. Close quote. That doesn't deny that state capitalist regimes who called themselves socialist made immense strides in the 20th century, notably in Russia and China. Since 1990, News from Neptune has been a weekly hour of spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media, first on a so-called community radio station, and now via Urbana Public TV and YouTube. Earlier editions of this program are available at archive.org. Chomsky says in the U.S. media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. David Green and I, with the help of J.B. Nicholson, will try to say some true things on a "You crane your necks and you still can't see" U.S. foreign policy edition of News from Neptune. Mainstream media is exercised by the report of a whistleblower, so-called, who said he heard of Trump enlisting the new president of Ukraine in compiling dirt on Biden's son. 1. Joe Biden's son does appear dirty, and 2, the U.S. political establishment, particularly the Democrats and the intelligence community, want to use this whistleblower's account to revive impeachment proceedings against Trump. Ukraine Gate, son of Russia Gate. Trump derangement syndrome, concentrating on Trump's character to distract from criticism of ongoing U.S. policy, especially war policy, means the clearest accounts are coming from quite unlikely sources. The Jimmy Dore Show on YouTube, as J.B. Nicholson has been repeatedly pointing out, is one of the clearest accounts of what's actually going on in these matters. It's even more strange, the Tucker Carlson Show on Fox News. Yes, Fox News has been given the most detailed and accurate account of this whole business this week. I'm as surprised as anybody else that I'm watching Tucker Carlson regularly, but he's got the goods. The question that we might ask, side note on the whistleblower, the complaint which was aired this week, and the Director of National Intelligence spent a lot of time before Congress explaining where it came from and what it meant. Jeffrey Sinclair, who writes for Counterpunch, says, I don't know who the whistleblower is, but after reading the complaint, it's clear that they are a better writer than most of the journalists at the New York Times or the Washington Post. They were probably an English major at Yale, recruited to the CIA because there were no jobs left in academia. I think Jeffrey is probably right, both on the style of the account from the whistleblower and the source of CIA personnel. It looks like it is the CIA's turn to take Trump out as part of the campaign to do so by the intelligence community. The FBI, remember, back to the beginning of the Trump administration, tried very much to do that and failed. Remember Peter Strzok, in an email to his lover, an FBI agent, from August 2016. Quote, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Asked a top FBI lawyer, Lisa Page, in one of these texts. Right? Peter Strzok, the agent overseeing the FBI's investigation into links between Mr. Trump's campaign and Russia, answered, no, he won't. We'll stop it, close quote. Well, the result was Russiagate, and it failed to stop it. And now it looks like it's the CIA's turn with Ukrainegate. Why is the intelligence community, I hate the phrase, but we mean the FBI and the CIA, so opposed to Trump? They remember that he was the first major party candidate in 40 years to attack the neo-lib and neocon policies followed by all administrations in those 40 years, notably more austerity and more war provocations against Russia and China. That's the CIA and the FBI's bread and butter. Even though Trump has largely adopted those policies in office, the FBI, CIA, and the rest of the political establishment fear that he can't be trusted to continue to do so, given that those attacks on the political establishment's orthodoxy were what, after all, made him president. With the new election coming up, the FBI and the CIA have to get their ducks in a row and make sure that Trump is down with the program of war provocations and international austerity to the benefit of the U.S. 1%. They can't allow him to do the sorts of things that he suggested he would do and that, as I say, contributed to his becoming president. It's a serious battle by night at stake here, and we've seen a new chapter of it, I think, or a new engagement of it in the so-called whistleblower this week. What's the top of your list, David?
Well, yeah, certainly if the New York Times is any indication, they're going full out for this.
Yep.
I don't read the Washington Post, but I assume it's the same thing.
But you don't have to if you read the New York Times.
That's right. I've had something on the burner here for a couple of weeks, actually probably for a whole month, and I wanna talk about this. Child prostitution, American child prostitution. Nicholas Kristof of the aforementioned New York Times wrote a column on September 14th, this past September 14th, titled, "Thousands more Jeffrey Epsteins are still out there. They operate with impunity, continuing to sexually exploit children." Two sentences, or three from this article, or four, are, as world leaders prepare to gather at the United Nations, some 40 million people are effectively locked into modern forms of slavery, according to the Global Slavery Index. That includes sex trafficking, but also child marriages and a great deal of forced labor. In the United States, no one knows exactly how many children are sold for sex, but estimates have run between 10,000 and 100,000 in any given year. Whatever the number, it's too many. In order to support this assertion of 10,000 to 100,000 child prostitutes in the United States, children prostituted in the United States, meaning mostly one would be talking about girls between the ages of, say, 12 or 13 and 17. He inserted two links, one to a long study, which I haven't read thoroughly, but doesn't look credible to me in terms of their methodology and their data and the kind of estimating that they do. Another link that Nicholas Kristof made regarding child prostitution was to a 2012 statement, something called, that's 7 years ago, something called Ernie Allen. I don't know who Ernie Allen is. I still don't know who Ernie Allen is. But anyway, Ernie Allen's statement in response to President Obama's speech launching a new effort to combat human trafficking at the Clinton Global Initiative in New York. And then the subtitle to this little blurb is Praise for President Obama's new effort to combat human trafficking at home and abroad, announced during speech at Clinton Global Initiative. Quote, according to the United Nations, 1.2 million children are trafficked each year worldwide, and 1.8 million children are used in commercial sex, many sold into sexual slavery by poor families, and others abducted and trafficked into brothels and the sex industry. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime has reported that 79% of human trafficking is sexual exploitation. In the United States, University of Pennsylvania, and recall this, Pennsylvania, research funded by the Justice Department, again, this is back in 2012 that this was written, estimates that at least 100,000 American children each year are the victims of sex trafficking and prostitution. Before we go on, let's just notice how quickly we go from global human trafficking to child sex trafficking in this country with this figure of 100,000, which was what Nicholas Kristof based his statement on, although he qualified it by saying any would be too much. Let's go back a year before 2012 and look at an article in the Village Voice. It was called Real Men Get Their Facts Straight. It was the real man referred to. I don't watch TV too much, so I didn't know that Ashton Kutcher was on a show in which he was a real man of some kind, and his partner Demi Moore were in a campaign to combat child sex trafficking in this country. The Village Voice in 2011, after Kutcher and Moore had been at it for a while, did a good investigative journalistic article on whether it's true that, as was persistently stated by Kutcher and Moore, there were between 100,000 and 300,000 children being sex trafficked during any given year in those previous years. Let's say for the previous few years back to 2000 or wherever they thought that whatever time period they thought that covered. So what the Village Voice authors write, I don't have their names here, but there was 3 of them, I believe. In the past 8 years, Congress has spent $200 million on child pornography in America, and another $180 million on all domestic trafficking involving sex or labor. Ask the feds how many child sex trafficking cases they have prosecuted in all this time, 8 years from prior to from 23 to 2011 when this was written. Ask the feds how many child sex trafficking cases they have prosecuted in all this time, however, and you're hard-pressed to evaluate how far your tax dollars are going. The Department of Justice says it has no way of tabulating how many prosecutions end up in front of a judge. As astonishing as that seems, the details are worse. The latest report covers January 28th to June 2010. That's 2.5 years. Of the 45 Justice Department task forces, 45 Justice Department task forces in operation at that time, 42 reported at least one incident. But an quote-unquote incident is merely an allegation or suspicion that was investigated for at least 1 hour, nothing more. Of the 45 teams of DOJ lawyers, Homeland Security and FBI agents, and local law enforcement, only 18 of the task forces kept accurate paperwork. Those 18 teams confirmed that they'd identified 248 children involved in sex trafficking over the 30-month period. That would be about 100 per year, way less than 100,000 that is asserted over and over and over, had been being asserted for many years before that, since about 2001, and continues to be asserted by Nicholas Kristof in 2019. 100 versus 100,000. In other words, with the full authority, I'm going on here quoting the Village Voice article, In other words, with the full authority of federal law enforcement, 18 joint task forces were lucky to average 8 kids a month, or 100 per year. Give the 27 non-reporting task forces the benefit of the doubt. If they'd operated at the capacity of the functional 18, they would have added another 150 kids per year. If all 45 task forces had the same degree of success, they would possibly have located a total of 250 kids per year who were trafficked. Not 100,000, and certainly not 300,000. That 100,000 to 300,000 was based on a report, a debunked report by University of Pennsylvania researchers that is again referred to by this Ernie Allen character and Nicholas Kristof. This keeps just moving forward and forward through literally decades, that there are 100,000 to 300,000 children being sex trafficked in the United States per year, or they may qualify by saying 100,000 to 3,000 at risk of sex trafficking, because that's what these people who really don't know what they're talking about do. They use language to kind of cover themselves. And so these Village Voice writers conclude, or at least they go on, after millions upon millions of dollars, after years of raising awareness, after incalculable effort by religious, civic, and municipal workers, after focused attention from local and federal law enforcement, why so few cases prosecuted and why so few children rescued? Jay Albanese, a criminologist at Virginia Commonwealth University, spent 4 years heading up the Department of Justice Research Division. There's tons of, and he's quoted, there's tons of estimates on human trafficking. They're all crap. It's all guesswork, speculation. The numbers are inherently unbelievable. And if you work with data on a national level, as I did for many years with childhood risk factors, that 100,000 to 300,000 standard estimate, even though it was given by people associated with a university, doesn't seem believable to me, which is why I started to dig into this a little bit. The other reason I started to dig into this a little bit was because of Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not sure what my thought process was, but I've been concerned with this business of using issues like child sex trafficking, child prostitution, so on and so forth, to create a kind of a moral panic. Probably relates to my 3-year-old concern with the moral panic around rape and alleged rapes on college campuses. I've been fascinated by the lack of ability to get reliable data on these matters and the manner in which moral panics are created, how sort of easily they are among liberals. Going back again to what we've mentioned on this show many times, Alexander Coburn's work on the daycare scandals, the alleged daycare abuse scandal of the 1980s, which was thoroughly debunked, although it took years and maybe 2 decades for that to happen. I'm just fascinated by this whole moral panic thing. And I was particularly fascinated by the history of the recent child prostitution moral panic in light of Jeffrey Epstein, because it's pretty clear what this Village Voice article, what they come to is that it doesn't seem that there's more than 1,000 children if one used proper methods. It doesn't seem that there's more than 800 to 1,000 children in any given year that are even seen as at risk in this country. And the Village Voice article does a good job. Talked to a lot of local police departments, a lot of good people doing work in this area, people who understand how this works. And they came out just feeling like, A, that they've got this problem pretty well in hand, believe it or not. for all of the criticism of the cops get for various things. And there aren't more than 800 to 1,000 per year. But yet, Jeffrey Epstein was able to child prostitute, conservatively speaking, 100 girls per year for years, meaning that the child prostitution problem in this country is a Jeffrey Epstein problem. By taking Jeffrey Epstein out of it, you take away 10% of the whole problem of 325 million people. You get it down from 1,000. I mean, his victims weren't counted in this 800 to 1,000, but if you did, he'd be 10% of that, and they were real victims, as opposed to, in a lot of cases, if you read the Village Voice article, girls who'd run away from home for a week or two, gotten involved with some problems, were returned to home, that sort of thing. So I'm just fascinated by moral panics. I'm fascinated by the idea that we can fabricate all this data about child prostitution while Jeffrey Epstein is getting away with child prostitution and given a slap on the wrist, a year-long term with 12 hours a day release time in a nice Florida jail. It boggles the mind as to what this culture and what this political system is able to do. And then after doing all that, I was going to talk about this even before Nicholas Kristof wrote this article, but there he is. Thousands more Jeffrey Epsteins are still out there. No, there's a few more Jeffrey Epsteins out there in his class of people. And Jeffrey Epstein got away with it because he was rich. And the other people aren't getting away with it because they're not rich, and there are not that many of them anyway. Not to diminish anything that might happen, any of the horrible things that might happen in this context. But whenever we're going through a general crisis in this country, it comes down to having this moral panic imposed upon the population by privileged people, not even knowing that it's their own left hand, meaning Jeffrey Epstein, or Bill Clinton, or Donald Trump, or Alan Dershowitz, that is really, or Leslie Wexner, who are really the problem.
Thank you, David. That raises a whole series of questions, as you suggest. I must say that my response depends largely on my age, and the fact that my own children were born in the 1960s and 70s, and were what was called amongst good liberals in those days free-range children in a lot of ways.
Hadn't heard that one.
Well, you hadn't really? Well,
Nope.
You're younger than I am.
I
so
am.
It's and that there was a mood, perhaps involving what you're talking about as moral panics, in the generation after, or as that generation developed, against the sort of free-range approach to rearing children. And I must say, if I were in that position again today, or if I were sent back by the time machine to those years, I would be less comfortable with the free-range approach for a variety of reasons, up to and including school shootings. A good number, and the series of events that you're talking about here, which involve not only well-to-do people, but a large number of victims from various classes, of course. It would concern me more now than it did concern me when it made a difference. So I also agree with your suggestion that this can't be separated from other political and social problems in which our elders and betters, if you like, have been very much involved for a long time on the QT.
Yeah.
So,
if one wants to look at the child prostitution problem in this country, and not, again, whenever you read an article about this, you'll talk about global human trafficking. Then they'll talk about which includes labor much more than sex, but sexual labor also. And then you see this honing down of this data into like child prostitution in this country. But if you throw a bunch of really big global numbers at it and put those in that context, they think you're still talking about huge numbers. And I can't help but thinking that there's something going on here that is just diverting us. If they want to talk about child prostitution within the context of those girls who are girls and some boys, if they want to talk about it as a they've talked about it recently in terms of the LGBTQ community, which they claim is more subject to that sort of thing, and they don't really explain why that is or how that works. But that's part of that sort of moral panic also, transgenderism and so forth that we've talked about on this show. If they want to talk about that in terms of neoliberalism, fine. If they want to be realistic about the data and talk about it in terms of what neoliberalism does to families and does to people's lives and does to their perceptions of their future, that's fine. Not that that's the whole problem, but that's the context in which children are thrown away, or that children are in situations which they feel they have to get out of. Okay, fine. But the purpose of all this, it just seems to me to be to sort of throw panic in people and then not talk about what really needs to be talked about. And it just doesn't make, just one more thing, I know I'm going on, but you read the paper every day. The News Gazette covers crime. When was the last time you saw a story about a prostitute? They cover crime. When was the last time that there was a story in Champaign County or any of the adjoining counties that are covered in that newspaper about any prostitute, about any child prostitute? It just doesn't. They start throwing out numbers like 100,000. Well, a few of those would have to be in Champaign County, and it just doesn't make any sense. And it would be good, from my perspective, if people understood how baldly and boldly that they can be lied to or misinformed by respected people, especially like Nicholas Kristof, who drapes himself in all this righteousness.
You're watching News from Neptune for Friday, the 27th of September. Russiagate pivots to the Biden-Ukraine corruption, but the DNC, the Democrats, is still chasing a new losing proposition, says our chief researcher, Jeff Nicholson. He quotes the Jimmy Dore show, which is more and more becoming a bellwether for critical news reporting. Dore interviews Aaron Maté, the most informed and accurate reporter on the entire Russiagate affair. Dore says the whole thing going on with Trump, Ukraine, and Biden this week. Of course, just like with Russiagate, the Democrats are funding a fake issue to distract everybody from the stuff they should be screaming about. But they're not screaming about the stuff they're supposed to be screaming about or opposing Trump on the stuff they're supposed to be opposing him on. Why? Because they agree with him. This is Jimmy Dore on the Democrats. Like what? Like how about his policy of sending troops to Saudi Arabia? Right now, Trump is sending troops to Saudi Arabia, mainly because Saudi Arabia received a remarkable blow from the Houthi in Yemen. No one is asking, why are you doing that? Why don't we just sell them $110 billion worth of weapons? First of all, why do we care? Don't we have more energy than we know what to do with? Aren't we exporting energy now from the U.S.? Why do we care? Now, this would raise the whole question of the U.S. control of world oil sales, of your world oil traffic, and its reason for killing people at great rate in the Middle East. Here's what I said, says Jimmy Dore. I'm offering $1 million to the first corporate newsreader to mention the petrodollar while reporting that we're sending Americans to protect Saudi oil. Now, if you knew why we're doing that, why we're in bed with Saudi Arabia, it's because when we went off the gold standard, they promised to make everybody, when they bought their oil, to do it in American dollars, which is called the petrodollar, which props up our economy and keeps our interest rate low. So if we ever go off the petrodollar, that's going to be bad for our economy. This, by the way, I'm quoting Jimmy Dore's account of the Middle East, which is a sophisticated one, but it's not open. It's not without some criticism. The way in which dollars work and the U.S. control of oil and the purposes of that control is worth talking about, which is what Dore's show is doing, and very few others are.
I'm not sure about this petrodollar thing, but I have to do some research on that.
One of the big reasons we're in bed with Saudi Arabia and why we're doing Yemen with them, this is Jimmy Dore now, we're committing genocide, we're helping a dictator, a theocratic, oppressive, murderous dictatorship, commit a genocide in Yemen. We're doing that right now. That's the real scandal that no one will talk about. What are they talking about instead? Trump asks someone to look into the corruption of Joe Biden's kid, who is corrupt. That's it. Did I get it right, Aaron? He says to Aaron Maté, whom he's interviewing. How am I doing so far? Aaron Maté says, I totally agree, and it's so symbolic that this is the issue that leads the Democrats to finally coalesce around impeachment, because it shows you can do anything. You can cause, as you say, Jimmy, genocide in Yemen, but you cannot go after another member of the establishment. And so Democrats, and that's what has been done with the criticism of the behavior, the peculation of Hunter Biden in the Mideast. So Democrats and the Democratic partisans who identify with him in the media, this now in the impeachment-worthy scandal. This now is the impeachment-worthy scandal. Not committing mass murder in Yemen, not pulling out of the Iran deal, the Paris Climate Accords, and locking up kids in cages and subjecting immigrants to even more cruelty than they were subjected to under Obama, where it was already pretty cruel. No, you cannot go after Joe Biden. You can do those. What Maté is saying here is you can do those other things, clearly crimes for which we should be thinking of impeachment, but we're not. And what we're talking about is impeachment because Trump has exposed the corruption of the Democratic candidate's son. No, and this is what we're going to get you for. This is the endemic. Richard Nixon, what was he impeached for? He wasn't impeached for mass murder and bombing Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. He was impeached for going after the other factor of the establishment, the burglary of the Democratic Party headquarters. The Democratic Party was broken into. Nixon covered that up. He lied about it. You can't do that. You can't go after the other faction of the elite, or else that faction, plus their partisans in the media, will go after you. And so that's what's unfolding now. And the process, the Democrats and their media partisans are enrolling who is legitimately agreed by Trump's existence as president, but they're enrolling them in this kind of narrow and backward grievance that's not going to catch on. This is trying to get Trump on something so minuscule in the scale of his actual crimes. That's Aaron Maté talking about the Ukraine gate and the present attempt to get an impeachment process going against the president, which the Democrats want to do in order to distract from the real policies, the neoliberal and neoconservative policies that the administration is supposed to be following, and that the Democrats and the intelligence community are very much afraid they won't. There's much more on this. Well, I'll put an account of this discussion between Jimmy Dore and Aaron Maté, a link to that discussion on the Facebook page for News from Neptune. There are depths of this and background of this that is totally absent from the general accounts we've got this week in mainstream media, as I say, with the possible exception of things like Door's YouTube show, and of all people, the evening news commentator from Fox News. I write things occasionally on Facebook, and people write back, how can you possibly quote Fox News? If Fox says it, it must be false. Well, I said the remarkable thing is that if the mainstream news says it, it's very likely false, and just occasionally Fox News breaks through that, as they have on the Tucker Carlson show in the evenings this week, on an account of this remarkably fake Ukraine Gate whistleblower story that we've been treated to for the last couple of days.
Yeah, how do I say that? To bring this down to a little bit of a, what I was going to say, I've sort of resisted watching Jimmy Dore because I don't really want to be entertained by the news, and I don't want to be angered necessarily by the news. I just want to be informed. No, I just want to be I want to get the kind of news that is thoughtful rather. And I mean, Jimmy Dore's thoughtful, but he's also funny and mad. And and also, of course, uses a lot of nasty words, but
which is the reason we can't run the clips here.
But still, but I'm sort of giving in to watching him a little bit more because, especially late in the evening when maybe I want to be entertained a little more at least. But the kind of reverse of that is that, you watching Tucker Carlson or whatever. And then that's looking at liberal groups, looking at what we're hearing. There was a letter in the News Gazette this morning from a group that defined themselves as promoting something called Solidarity Sundays, and which I'd heard of before, but I hadn't really looked up. I think they're very much related, interrelated, intertwined, probably incestuously so. With this Bend the Arc group that this is the non-Jewish, this is the non-sectarian Bend the Arc, post-Trump, anti-Trump, hashtag resistance group that also operates on a national level, but locally. So I was provoked to look this up, to sort of quickly Google this. And it says Solidarity Sundays is a nationwide network of over 100 feminist activist groups focused on taking action to resist the current un-American administration, as well as the systemic inequities that existed long before November 8th, 2016. They're referring to the day that Trump was elected president. But before then, there was still this, but you didn't have Solidarity Sundays during the Obama era. Gee, I wonder why. And then the blurb on their website goes, who we are. We have an active online community of 17,000 plus and hundreds of attendees of our monthly meetings, which take place in over 100 cities nationwide. We post daily actions in our Facebook group, as well as info about relevant issues and upcoming events. Solidarity Sundays is led by woman-identified feminists, and the majority of our members and event attendees are women. Men are welcome as long as they're down with the feminist agenda and are committed to taking a back seat while women run the show. No mansplaining, bro. I'm hearing shades of the anti-Bernie sort of thing, Not too hard to hear. We aim to be responsive to immediate political moments / needs, but are focused on core issues, capital C, capital I, of racial justice, reproductive rights, the environment, LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, gun control, education, protecting civil liberties, economic injustice. Notice how far down the list they put that one. And defending those made most vulnerable by the Trump, and Trump for some reason is TR*MP administration. We believe that persistent engagement with elected officials, civic education, and the political empowerment of everyday people are key to the hashtag the capital T, resistance, capital R. While members do not ascribe to identical ideologies, we believe that the following are unequivocally real, urgent, and not up for debate. Racism and white supremacy, white privilege, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, attacks on immigrants, refugees, homeless, stateless, and all indigenous peoples worldwide. We are committed to resisting all of these, is Solidarity Sundays. And I think that these groups like BT, Bend the Arc, and Solidarity Sundays are skirting the legal divide between a group that is politically identified with the party, so under a different legal and monetary regime, and those who are nonprofit and just promoting the cause. I don't much care about this legal thing, but that's what the legal thing is, and you can kind of feel these groups grappling with what their identity is, trying to avoid saying we're Democrats, we're identified with the Democratic Party, and further than that, saying we're identified with Joe Biden and not Bernie Sanders. So all this is going on in the background of this Trump-era Democratic Party. And of course, you've got the intersectionality, you've got the identity politics, you've got the whole range of bags of tricks, what they're talking about, what they're not talking about, WAR, and it's just it's so true to form. It's just so true to form. And I'm sorry, I don't care about the mansplaining, whatever. Just stop it. People are going to have to recognize what I wrote a letter in response to last week's, Belden Fields letter. It should appear, it was a response to the Bend the Arc thing. I'm very mean to them, I know. I don't want to put up with this nonsense, Carl. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dave. We'll get letters.
Yes, I hope so.
This is the Wall Street Journal. We don't deal with peculiar news sites here. We go to the top. The Wall Street Journal says, having failed to impeach the president over Russia collusion and obstruction of justice, Democrats are now targeting Trump over a phone call with Ukraine, an issue that could do more damage to Joe Biden. I think that's right, and I think that's what we should be, one of the things we should be watching the development of this week. The so-called whistleblower who was seconded to the White House was from the CIA. He's a CIA man, and his dismay at what he saw in the White House, I think, is genuine, because there's suggestions that it's not entirely down with the war provocations being supported by the CIA. He is called a whistleblower, but he's obviously in a very different position from the serious whistleblowers who are being persecuted by the U.S. government, notably Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and the author of the book on the table in front of me, Edward Snowden. The Washington Post talks about whistleblowers by saying, read the whistleblower complaint, that's the CIA man, regarding President Trump's communications with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Quote, Trump responds to hearing on whistleblower complaint, says MSNBC. Quote, Trump-Ukraine scandal. What did the whistleblower say, and how serious is it, writes The Guardian, the British liberal paper. Quote, whistleblower complaint says White House tried to lock down Ukraine call records, announces CBS, something they're not going to allow. Quote, whistleblower's complaint is a devastating report from a savvy official. The savvy official is the CIA man, remember. That was from, of course, CNN, the Clinton News Network, and hardly surprising. Who is this savvy official? Who is this courageous whistleblower who boldly shone the light of truth upon the mechanisms of power in the interests of the common man? Who is this brave, selfless individual who set off an impeachment inquiry by taking a stand and revealing the fact that the U.S. president made a phone call in July urging Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to help investigate corruption allegations against Joe Biden and his son. Well, believe it or not, according to the New York Times, this brave, noble whistleblower, who the mainstream media are currently championing, is an officer of the Central Intelligence Agency. The idea that the media needs to protect a high-level CIA officer making explosive claims about the president, which has now been used as the basis for impeachment proceedings, is such an insane perversion of journalistic ethics. Quote, the whistleblower who revealed that President Trump sought foreign help for his re-election, that's the way it's being spun now, and that the White House sought to cover it up, is a CIA officer who was detailed to work at the White House at one point, according to 3 people familiar with his identity, the New York Times reports. It doesn't report his identity, but we know they're familiar with it. The man has since returned to the CIA, the people said. Little else is known about him. You know, he's off fighting the good fight out there in dangerous country, but now he's safely home in Langley, apparently, and we are all to be relieved by the fact. There you have it, a mysterious stranger from the lying, torturing, propagandizing, drug trafficking, assassinating, coup-staging, warmongering, psychopathic CIA was working in the White House, heroically provided the political media class with politically powerful information out of the goodness of his heart, and then vanished off into Langley Sunset. Langley, Virginia is where the CIA is. Clearly there's nothing suspicious about this story at all. Well, it seems to me there's a great deal suspicious about it.
And that is Caitlin Johnstone?
That's Caitlin Johnstone, and her entire article, which should be examined on this matter, is on the, a link to it is on the Facebook page for News from Neptune. Johnstone continues, in all seriousness, even to call the spook a whistleblower is ridiculous on its face. You don't get to call someone from the U.S. intelligence community a whistleblower unless they're actually whistleblowing on the U.S. intelligence community. That's not a thing. A CIA officer who exposes information about government officials is an operative performing an operation unless proven otherwise, because that's what the CIA does. It liberally leaks information wherever it's convenient for CIA agendas, while withholding all other information behind a veil of government secrecy. That's a corrective to what the mainstream media is doing on this story, but there is obviously a great deal more to it, and it points out the theme that we started with tonight, that we have to understand that the intelligence community, CIA and the FBI.
Even William Safire didn't like that term, back in the day.
Because it's self-serving nonsense, of course. And the entire intelligence community continues to be desperately afraid that the populist wave that produced Trump will find Trump, in fact, interfering with the fundamental policies of the American government, the war provocations and the economic policies in support of the 1% that the CIA is there to protect. I'm reminded of the mayor of Chicago who once said, the police department is not there to create disorder, the police department is there to protect disorder. Well, it was the disorder that the CIA was designed to protect, in those long ago days when it was founded, and it was recognized by some people who knew what was going on. President Harry Truman, under whose administration the CIA was founded, observed at the time that it had really become a dangerous, independent organization that should be put out of business because it was setting policy and setting aside the other parts of the American government in those post-war years. That was the view of some American officials who themselves were hardly radical critics of American policy from the very beginning. The subsequent history of the CIA, documented in the best account I know is Tim Wise's book on the subject.
Tim Weiner.
Tim Weiner's book on the
Tim
subject.
Weiser is somebody we don't like. But that's another story.
David keeps a list, so be careful here.
Yeah.
Tim Weiner is exactly whom I meant, though. He's right about that.
Yeah.
And the book is worth reading, as are follow-ups in works by the aforementioned Alexander Cockburn and his colleagues in the media. But these are not mainstream media people at all. The CIA is deeply involved with the opposition to Trump, with the Trump derangement syndrome, and here they seem to have sent an agent into the White House precisely to provide fuel for a new Russiagate fire that's meant to bring down the administration. And the Democrats have taken the debate, how knowingly
Debate.
how knowingly is a little difficult to say, but the situation continues in ways that are unfortunately not unfamiliar, but are not reported by mainstream media.
Yeah, let me do a little, before we finish here, let me do a little more mansplaining in relation to an article on Mondo Weiss, which I've been getting mixed up with on the comments section. Mondo Weiss, Women's March cuts ties with another board member following Islamophobic smear campaign, quote unquote. Earlier this week, it was announced that Linda Sarsour, Tamika Mallory, and Bob Bland, who's female, would be stepping down as board members to focus on other projects. Sarsour had been falsely accused of anti-Semitism by pro-Israel organizations for years over a number of alleged transgressions, including her support for the BDS movement and her assertion that Zionism is incompatible with feminism. Mallory, the Black Lives Matter movement, had been criticized for allegedly supporting the Nation of Islam and praising its anti-Semitic leader praising anti-Semitic Louis Farrakhan. In 2018, she attended a Farrakhan event where he declared that he had, quote, pulled the cover off the eyes of the satanic Jew. That would be me, of course. After the exodus of the three members, the organization, the Women's March, the Women's March group, the basically white feminists who are pro-Hillary Clinton, they appointed Zara Ballou, the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, C-A-I-R, to the board. The decision was immediately met with right-wing condemnation. John Levine of the New York Post posted a long Twitter thread that included many past Ballou tweets that were critical of Israel. Quote, I'm more afraid of racist Zionists who support, which Ballou apparently tweeted, I'm more afraid of racist Zionists who support apartheid Israel than of mentally ill young people the FBI recruits to join ISIS, she wrote in 2015. And that she doesn't see any difference between American youth leaving the country to join the ISIS or the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. That's a good one as far as I'm concerned. Both are murderous war crime committing terrorist entities. Another tweet from Ballou, the CAIR person who was picked to replace these three other women as token people in the Women's March, but who is still kicked out again. They just can't get it right. They can't find somebody who doesn't offend them, just showing what the Women's March people are really about. This relates to the whole Bend the Arc thing about the fact that they don't really say they're pro-Israel. They don't want to really talk about it. But of course, they don't want to do with it. They want to be PEP, as we were talking about last week, or as Stephen Saleda said, and I referred to this in my letter to my most recent letter, which hasn't been published yet. It isn't that they're progressive except for Palestine. It's they're regressive because of Israel, and I'm not a big fan of Linda Sarsour or Tamika Mallory or the Black Lives Matter or any of these people, because I don't think they're the real deal either when it comes to critiques of what's going on in the Middle East or in this country. But it just goes to show you, and what I've been trying to argue on Mondoweiss is that we shouldn't care about this stuff. We just shouldn't care about the Women's March, and we shouldn't even care about people like Linda Sarsour, who has always seemed to me to be rather an opportunist, rather a phony, rather a fraud, and someone who is cashing in on her Palestinian background without doing anything to help the Palestinian people. How is that for mansplaining? For maybe anti-Zionist Jew-splaining or mansplaining or whatever you want to call it.
The co-founder of Black Lives Matter has struck a cynical deal with corporate Democrats to boost Elizabeth Warren by attacking Bernie Sanders' forces as racist. The Black Misleadership class, that's Glenn Ford's description of the people who in Congress and elsewhere are speaking up for Black Lives Matter and so forth. The Black Misleadership class and their friends are preparing for the 2016 presidential election in a particularly shameful manner.
2016 or 2020?
2020.
I think that was a misprint. I think true. I read the same thing.
You're absolutely right, and thank you for catching it.
Yeah.
In an effort to do the bidding of the Democratic Party establishment, they're cynically using claims of racism in an effort to prop up Elizabeth Warren as the false progressive choice. In the process, they've relegated black voter concerns to the whims of the group whose corrupt and inept machinations put Donald Trump in the White House. The sad story begins with the Working Families Party. Despite its well-chosen name, it's merely a front group for the Democratic Party. The word party in their title is a misnomer. WFP, Working Families Party, rarely runs its own slate of candidates. Instead, Democrats run with WFP endorsements in an effort to appear progressive. The sleight of hand often succeeds in giving leftist Democratic voters hope that their center-right party may actually do something that they would like. In 2016, and they mean 2016 now, the WFP membership endorsed Bernie Sanders with 80% of their votes. The WFP recently endorsed Elizabeth Warren, but the leadership have declined to say by how much or if the vote of the members differed from that of the leadership.
Jimmy Dore has been doing good work on this also.
We have recommended Jimmy Dore's program and other unlikely programs, including, God help me, the Fox News, the Fox Evening News. Things are not always what they seem. You've been watching News from Neptune for the 37th week of 2019. That's the 39th week, actually. A Ukraine Your Necks and You Still Can't See U.S. Foreign Policy edition. News from Neptune is presented by Carl Estabrook, David Green, and J.B. Nicholson. It's produced and directed by Jason Liggett and occasionally others.
Whoever they may be.
Whoever they may be.
Wherever they may be.
Jason is always there, however.
With Jason, we love Jason.
See your research notes.
And you should too.
From FB, on the Facebook page from J.B. Nicholson. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere in The Tempest, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies and a good night to you. And may the confusion be as bad as ours.